Hello, Benjamin Ario here from We Follow the Town, a weekly show where we look into all things Ipswich. And today I am with long-time Ipswich Town fan, Ipswich Town lifer, David Ager. First of all, the news of Paul Lambert being sacked broke yesterday night, quite late. What do you think about the news, and was it the right decision for the, higher-ups, should I say, to make?
Yeah, I get that strong impression. I mean, living down here in West Cornwall, I don't see the town too often, but I do try to keep up with match reports and odd snatches on TV, etc. But I think whatever criticism you might have of Paul Lambert, he's probably run his course, really. It looks to me as though you need someone fresh to go in and have another go, as it were. Also, of course, there seems to be a split between him and the club in some respects, and him and the chairman. I think probably, perhaps if you asked him, he'd be as relieved as anyone that it's got a chance to go and try somewhere else. But yeah, I feel sorry for him in a way. I think he's inherited a very difficult position. I think he probably tried his best and probably with fairly limited resources. But I think it's a good idea to bring a new manager in.
So where did it go wrong for Marcus Evans? Because he took over the club 14 years ago. I might be wrong in saying that. And when he first came in, fans were waving pounds or like money in the air, if that makes sense, because they were so happy that a rich owner had finally taken over at the club. But it never really kicked off. He gave a lot of money to Roy Keane, but ever since then he hasn't really invested. So, as I just said, where did it go wrong for Marcus Evans?
Well, I think he probably in some ways, he backed the wrong managers. And you could argue that I think Roy Keane was a strange decision to appoint for Ipswich. I mean, Roy Keane may well find himself a very good manager, maybe a very good manager in certain circumstances. But I think the history of Ipswich and this type of club it is one that I don't think Roy Keane would fit in. My heart sank when he was appointed because I felt he just wouldn't fit into Suffolk and Ipswich Town. I think that a number of mistakes were made in the transfer market. I get the impression that Evans got his fingers burnt with high-cost players, expensive players who didn't perform, and was then far more cautious. Perhaps was a little bit profligate when he started, then became more cautious later, perhaps too cautious, and really lost a sense of directions to that balance between spending money and being careful with money and running the club in a responsible manner. So I think there were some mistakes there. I think one or two managerial appointments didn't really come off. Just a little bit, one view is that he backed the wrong managers, but didn't back the right ones. And perhaps had he backed the name's
Mick McCarthy.
Mick McCarthy, yeah, sorry, the age catching up. It's right, but he, I think, had he backed Mick McCarthy more and supported him financially, then you might have had a better result. Look at how well Mick McCarthy's done at Cardiff. Now apparently is shortlisted for the Celtic job, and he's obviously a capable man. I felt a little bit sorry for him doing the best he could with limited resources. There we are.
So you kind of just alluded to this, that it's more of the owner and not necessarily the managers. Do you reckon that Mick McCarthy, for example, do you reckon he could have given more to the club? Do you reckon he could have maybe gotten the club promoted had he have worked under a different owner? Maybe the Cobbolds, for example, when they were at the club.
Yeah. Well, I think that what the Cobbolds did was to create a friendly, relaxed atmosphere. I think good management is often when you can create an atmosphere where people enjoy working there and they feel happy. They're not unduly pressed, where management decisions are consistent. And I think the thing about the Cobbles is there's always a sense of fun about Ipswich, a sort of family-friendly feel about the club, which I think made it easier for a manager to operate. I mean, nice story about Bobby Robson was that when he started at the club, the results weren't very good. Pardon me. And there was a demonstration by supporters to get rid of him after just a few games. There was a board meeting at which Ison, whatever it was, number 4 or something, was manager's report. They got to that point and John Cobbolds said, I wish to put on record now our apologies to Mr. Robson for the behaviour of the supporters. And Bobby Robson said later that he knew he was secure in the job there, that he had support. And I think it's that type of support you need at board level. You don't panic, you don't sack people too quickly. You give managers support and you create an environment, a structure in which they can work successfully. But I suppose the thing with the Robson years was that he had a number of things working. That was one. The club had a very good youth policy. Most of the great players they had came through that and cost the club nothing, except for their development, of course. It was a different age. I think that the way football goes now, I don't see, I'm sorry to say, Ipswich ever repeating that sort of success, however good a board or however good a manager they have. It's going, well, at least it would be extremely difficult, more so than it was then. But so you need that sort of structure of different things working for you that help. But yes, I get the feeling that it's a mixture of a chairman who perhaps had become slightly disillusioned. Who knows? Maybe he'll write his memoirs at the end of all this. We'll find out. But maybe a little disillusioned, perhaps a little out of his depth in some ways with the game, and choosing the wrong managerial appointments at times, not supporting management he should have done. All that sort of list of things.
So you stated that the Cobbolds had a very good relationship with the supporters and with the manager. Do you reckon that is what's lacking nowadays, especially with Marcus Evans, where the club isn't really ran as a community club, if that makes sense?
No, I think that's right. As I said, it was stress up. I used to watch Ipswich 2-3 times a season at home, and the odd one away, and that was because my parents lived near Ipswich, and I'd go back and see them. And I always chose a weekend when Ipswich were at home, so I'd take my father to see a game, and so I'd see games. And if I was in the Midlands when they were playing there, or if they were playing at Plymouth, for example, which when they're in the same division, I'd go and see them. So I'd keep in touch a little bit more then. I got the feeling that it was sort of lost my track of it. There was that sense of enjoyment and fun about the club, and the sense of purpose that was still there. But yeah, somehow. Sorry, remind me of the question, Ben.
So basically,
go on. Sorry.
So basically, do you reckon that Marcus Evans, basically, he hasn't really ran the club as a community club? He hasn't really developed a relationship with the supporters.
Right. Yeah, sorry, I beg your pardon. Mine was trail of another thing, but yeah, that's a strong impression I get. I mean, not being based in Ipswich, obviously, I just rely on what I can see in the press. But I get the feeling that although Paul Lambert seemed to make an effort to rebuild that sense of community, and so I think in an effortless sort of way, the Cobbolds did that. I say effortless; they didn't sort of have lots of procedures in place. It was just a natural way of doing things. You had that sense of community. And I also got the feeling going back watching them, I'm feeling amongst the crowd, talking to supporters in the pub before the game, that type of thing. That there was that friendliness and support of the club, which often is very easily lost if you have a board or a chairman or indeed a manager who loses the support of the fans.
So why do you think fans turned on Paul Lambert? Because when Paul Lambert first came in, fans nicknamed him PR Paul. He gave away free beers. I had a free beer when I went up to watch Ipswich. And he also paid for bus travel. So do you think that Paul Lambert do you reckon it was his fault that fans turned on him? Or do you reckon that the fans were simply impatient with his style of play, if that makes sense?
I think the impression of reading the stuff, as I say, I see them so rarely now. I have to rely on match reports and odd snatches on TV. But I get the feeling that the club were not playing, the team were not playing the sort of football people wanted. I think that part of the problem there, and so gradually people get frustrated if you're not really winning. Well, obviously started well this season, then tailed off. But if the team is winning, people will put up with some fairly ordinary football. But if it's not winning and it's not playing attractive football, it's doubly frustrating. But I'm afraid I've got a memory of some years ago watching the Town against Bristol City in the Championship, and with my late uncle and my late father, my uncle turned to me and said, we were spoiled. And this is the problem, that we were watching a very ordinary game, both teams around the middle of the division, ordinary football, and we were spoiled because we got such good football under Robson. And obviously it's going into a past era now. Your generation won't remember it, of course. But if you have a memory of that, then watching fairly ordinary football, you start to, you become frustrated and disappointed. And I guess that even younger people like yourself, you've got to sort of, how can I say, an inherited memory, a folk memory of those days, and you're looking for a recreation of that, and it isn't going to come. So I guess that people, we've got high expectations. We think. I remember the last time we got into the Premier League, there was this thing going around. Some of the club put out a notice saying back where we belong, and I thought, well, I'm sorry, but realistically, we more likely belong in the Championship. And going to the Premier League is an aberration. It's not the other way around. And I think that it's always difficult when a club has known really great times to accept the fact that you're not going to be a great club, or it's going to be very difficult to recreate that.
So let's go slightly off topic here. What was your favourite memory growing up as an Ipswich supporter? Because we're talking now about great times, about owners who cared about the club, managers who were actually good for once, unlike Paul Lambert. So what is your favourite memory of Ipswich Town?
I think the FA Cup semi-final in 1978, they played West Brom, and both teams really played well. I mean, there was a really gutsy performance, very, very busy. Lots of action, and really West Brom could have won. The last half hour, Ipswich just went ahead. They just took the game, and it was a wonderful game, better than the final, because both teams are more evenly matched. I thought Arsenal were disappointing in the final. Ipswich were a little bit too good, really, although only won 1-0. But in that game, it was a really first-class game. The other one, I remember when Ipswich came second to Aston Villa in the first. I saw them play at Aston Villa. I lived in the Midlands at the time, and Ipswich won 4-2. They were easily the better side. They didn't win the first division because they were tied up with semi-final of the FA Cup, semi-final of the League Cup. They're playing in Europe. Aston Villa, I don't think was such a good team, but they had a little bit more. They had fewer games, and I think they were just that little bit fresher at the end of the season. But Ipswich showed in that game their superb performance. So there's just two games that stick in my mind. Away to Feyenoord, I think they won 4-2. We missed the boat coming back. That's another story. But that was a terrific game. And again, Dutch football is so attractive, and Ipswich played very attractive football. Just wonderful memories, really terrific games.
So I'm in a weird situation as a fan where I've only really grown up with Marcus Evans football, if I can call it that. Like the first manager I remember was Jimmy Gilton. Yeah. Then, of course, I also remember Mick McCarthy. Probably one of my favourite memories was being at the playoff semi-final when we drew against Norwich at home, if I'm right, and then lost to them away at Carrow Road. So, it's a funny time to be an Ipswich Town fan, really. But do you reckon should the new owner come in? I forgot his name. Brett M. Johnson, I think that's what his name is. Do you reckon he could bring back the good old days? Do you reckon he could bring back the family atmosphere, the old values that the club had, and get us back to where we belong, which is in the Championship at the moment, but hopefully one day to be in the Premier League?
Well, well, who knows? I mean, I've tried to read up a little bit about this guy and about his background, and I can't find out too much. Certainly, I haven't read anything negative about him, but I guess time will tell to give him a chance. I mean, I'm going off on a slight tangent here, but I think one of the problems with British football is that we've got this model of football clubs where rich owners can come in, buy them out. So you have oil sheikhs and Russian oligarchs and wealthy American businessmen, and they might be, if you like, benevolent dictators. They may have, in a sense, I suppose the Cobbolds were. They were benevolent dictators, but they were great. But it's a bit of the luck of the draw as to whether you get an owner who's like that. I'd like to see us, and I think I blame the FA for encouraging this move, actually, but I'd like to have seen us have the sort of model of football club operation and management that you find in Germany or in Spain or Italy, where the clubs are owned by the supporters, where it's a cooperative. The club is seen as a community asset rather than a money-making operation. And football isn't like bingo halls or bowling alleys or cinemas. It's a different type of community asset. It's something that transcends simple entertainment. And I think the fact that the FA allowed clubs to become PLCs, the fact that they've got this absurd so-called fit and proper test for directors, which isn't fit and proper, they've encouraged the clubs to be seen as money-making operations rather than community assets. And I think that's a great shame. I mean, there are a few clubs that work like that, as I'm sure you're aware. Wimbledon, Chesterfield, Portsmouth, I think really that way, Harlem, have moved in that direction, usually after a complete collapse of the original ownership. But St Hereford's another one, and they're making their way back up now. But and you'll probably see Bury in that sort of position in time. I think possibly already is. But I think that model of operation ownership is so much healthier, and it works much better in continental teams, I think.
So do you reckon, you just mentioned about the fit and proper test that we have down here in England. Do you reckon that is where the Football League fails? Because we've seen teams like Bury, as you've just mentioned, fail on that hurdle due to the fact that they've had an owner who's basically incompetent of running a football club. We can point to Charlton as well, Blackburn as well, who've had owners who basically come in from abroad without knowing how to run a football club. So do you reckon that is where, as a Football League, or the 72, do you reckon that is where we fail?
Yeah, some years ago, the FA allowed clubs to become PLCs rather than limited companies. And the old rules over limited companies, they couldn't pay large dividends. The dividends were limited, which meant it stopped asset strippers and people who were just making money out of football from entering. You might own shares in Manchester United, but they weren't really worth that much, except for the kudos of being on the director. They weren't going to make you a lot of money. Well, now you can make a great deal of money, or it's possible to make a great deal of money out of football. And so you end up with these sorts of people who don't really have a great deal of interest in the football club or the community. I mean, sometimes they do. The Leicester chairman, you remember a few years ago, died in a helicopter crash in the ground. Was lauded in the town because he genuinely did believe in it. But it's the luck of the draw. You might have someone like that who is great, but more likely than not, you'll get someone there who's got other interests, and gradually the club has become divorced from the supporters, and I think it's quite wrong. I think the FA failed to really support and encourage that model of ownership that, as I say, is more common overseas. I think Barcelona, for example, is the football club is the pinnacle of the whole operation. You've got a whole range of sports activities within that structure. Years ago, I worked with a chap who served in the army in Germany. He's a good goalkeeper, played semi-pro football, but he told me proudly he'd played for Borussia Dortmund. I said, that's bloody good, Pete. He said, well, it was their sixth team. Well, I think their sixth team was pretty useful as well, but he hadn't played for the first. But the point I'm making is that these clubs they were community operations with lots of things. You and I could get involved there without having much ability necessarily to play a game, but you could be involved and enjoy yourself in that great community club.
So do you reckon that when Brett M. Johnson comes in, should he buy the club, do you reckon that we should be cautious with him? Because again, we don't know whether he's going to be a good owner or not. We don't know whether he's going to be another Marcus Evans.
Yeah. Well, obviously you've got to give him a bit of slack, haven't you? Let's not condemn him before he starts. It may turn out to be really good for the town. Let's hope he is. So keep an open mind. Slight caution, as with all these people who come in. But yeah, I've got no reason to think he won't be good, and it may well be he'll spend some time communicating with supporters and winning people over and trying to go. But I don't think there's any reason why the club shouldn't regain the friendliness and the competence and the good organisation they had at all. That can be done. That's not impossible. It just needs decent management. But obviously it will take a little while to recover all the things financially, getting the club back on a really strong, even keel, and then challenging on the field for moving up the divisions.
So let's talk about the club structure a minute, because Marcus Evans is notorious for not being surrounded by football people. Leo Neal, the director of football, he's only worked in business. He's not a football man. He's probably a football supporter at best. Whereas Brett M. Johnson, he allegedly is going to bring in Mark Ashton, Bristol City director of football. He used to be a player. He's been surrounded by football his entire life. Do you reckon that should we get the structure right and bring in the right people, such as former players, people who've worked in the game in the past, do you reckon that could be the key to success?
Well, I think that bear in mind that if you're on the management side of a football, let's say you're the human resources manager or a marketing manager, or an accountant, then you don't necessarily have to have that much knowledge of football. These are technical skills that you that can apply to any number of situations. It's good if you do have a love of the game because, I mean, if you're an accountant, you work for a club and you've got a love of the game, you're more likely to be enthused by what's happening. But you wouldn't need to know much about football in order to manage the accounts of the club effectively. So there are distinctions here between management and knowledge of football. And I think the Cobbolds, going back to them, were quite pleased to tell you that they knew sod all about footballing. So they just enjoyed that they were there for the ride, and it was great because what you needed was that skill at the back of the club to manage the organisation of the club. But the football skill was with Robson or whoever the manager was in their time, and they would rely on the manager to do the football side of it and leave him alone. And one of the problems with a lot of clubs, of course, is where you get directors who know nothing about football who then try to tell the manager what to do. And we've had plenty of examples of that. So, yeah, but I think certainly you're right that you need people with a football brain and a football experience to be involved, and as well as people on the pure management side of the operation of the club. And I think that bringing people like that in, I don't know much about the individuals you're talking about, but I imagine they're people with a good pedigree, and that can only be to our benefit.
So we were talking on Facebook the other day, and you told me a wonderful quote from John Cobbold himself. I can't quite remember it. It was about wine.
Yeah. Well, it was famous some years ago. The BBC did a programme of Ipswich, and I think it was at the height of their powers, about 1981 or two, just not long before Robson left, and possibly about the time they won the UEFA Cup, that sort of time. And they said to John Cobbold, "Well, look, everything's going fine. You're financially doing well. You're second in the league. You're playing in Europe, and so on and so forth. It's a great club. What's the worst thing that could possibly happen to you?" And he said, "Well, it would be running out of chilled white wine in the boardroom." And it was a lovely, slightly complacent attitude, but it was well known for some time after that was the case. So, but yeah, there was that very laid back sort of attitude from the pair of them. There's a nice story. A friend of mine some years back went to one of these sports dinners where you sit on a table with famous sports people, and he was on the table with John Ellsworthy. John Ellsworthy was in the Championships team in 62, and he was talking to him, and Ellsworthy was saying, "Well, I was lunchtime. We'd done some training, and I was stood in Portman Road with another player. They were only apprentices at the time. He was about 17, 18, and this enormous Daimler rolled up, and John Cobbold got out of it and said, 'Hello, lads.' He said, 'Do you want an afternoon shooting?' So they they put him in the back of the Daimler, and they drove off to his estate, which is up the other side of Woodbridge on it. And they had an afternoon shooting. And John Ellsworthy said, how many club chairmen would take two apprentice footballers on a shooting expedition?" So yeah, so there were lots of stories like that about them. And it was it really did give the club. It was they were eccentric and slightly wild, but it did create that great atmosphere that people love playing for them. And of course, a lot of footballers stayed with the club a long time and then stayed in the area when they retired. So it's the club. It led to good success. Yeah.
Now, imagine if we had owners like that this time round, in Brett and Johnson. I don't know why I keep saying that name. Now, imagine if we had owners like that. I reckon the fans would fall back in love with Ipswich again, because I reckon a lot of fans, thanks to Marcus Evans, have kind of fallen out with the club. Am I being too harsh for saying that?
No, I think that you're probably right. I mean, it's funny. I was talking to my brother who lives in Derby, and we're both sort of keen Town fans. But I was talking to him about the way things are going, and he said, "Dave, I don't really look at the results anymore. Well, a few seasons ago, I could have told you the result of every game of the season. It's all logged in my memory. They lost to so and so, they drew with such and such. But and I do keep a weather eye on the results, but I don't keep such an interest in the who's playing or what the results are as I once did. And but I think that could be easily rekindled. I mean, it's not difficult. You get a bit of success on the pitch, some attractive football, and a nice atmosphere. And I think, yeah, you'll find the supporters come back
So let's talk about a bit more about Paul Lambert, because we've mainly been talking about the owner, but we haven't actually gone on much about Paul Lambert. Do you reckon that Paul Lambert should have been given more of a chance? Do you reckon that he should have been given a chance under the potential new owner to prove himself? Because Paul Lambert was very vocal about the lack of money he had been given to work with. And he was also vocal about, well, dare I say it, how poor Marcus Evans was as an owner.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the things here is that you never know quite what's going on behind the scenes, do you? I mean, my initial thought is to say you're probably right with what we know, that he was. I feel sorry for him because I think possibly a little bit. He wasn't properly supported. He was doing the best he could with the resource he had, and so you have to have some sympathy for that. But I think quite often when you read about a manager leaving or not succeeding, you don't know what's going on behind the scenes. You don't know why that relationship broke down, or why the relationship wasn't so good, or what impacts the manager was having on the players. I mean, do we know much about how the players reacted to Paul Lambert? And we probably never will know exactly. Some of them might tell the Sunday paper what was happening, and you get a story. But it's interesting. I mean, I take an interest in Luton Town because I lived in Luton for some years. They had a very successful manager called Nathan Jones. He got them almost into the Championship. He went to Stoke City from creating an attractive and successful team at Luton. He went to Stoke, which had far more resources. He'd paid far much greater money, and he was a complete disaster. He's now back at Luton, and they're not doing too badly. Now, why is it that Nathan Jones was the starring success at Luton, a club with relatively limited resources, a maximum gate of 10,500, and he was so spectacularly unsuccessful at Stoke, which is a club with much greater resources, a bigger gate. Now, there's something in there. I mean, presumably he may have just been unlucky. It maybe didn't get on with certain people. Maybe his style of management didn't match. We don't know. But it does seem odd to me that you could get a manager who's so highly successful in one place, so unsuccessful in another. And often it's that chemistry, the combination of factors that you need for a manager to succeed.
And it's funny you say that, because I used to live a few minutes away from Luton, and I used to see a few Luton games growing up. I saw Luton versus Plymouth at Kenilworth Road. But do you reckon that the Luton, I don't know what you call it, philosophy maybe, do you reckon that is the model to follow? Because Luton have literally gone from the non-leagues. I know they were relegated from the Championship initially, but they've gone from the non-leagues all the way to the Championship, and they're doing well in the Championship this season. They're 14th, which is good for them. Do you reckon that is the style of model we should really follow?
Well, I think Luton went through some very bad stages. You probably know the reason they dropped into non-league football was that they had so many points deducted because of going to administration more than once. They had, how can I describe him, a chairman who was basically a rogue, who mismanaged the club dramatically, and I mean, it was on the edge of criminality, really. So now the club has a managing body, board, which is much better. I mean, a friend of mine is a season ticket holder, and there's much more involvement of the supporters. And there was a thing he was a member of, Trust in Luton, I think, which was of season ticket holders and others who are working hard to get the club back. So it's gone to the depths, not just in terms of its position in the pyramid, but also its operation and management to much greater success. And I think it's down to a much more effective board that they have now, and it's led to that. Yeah, and they're moving to a new ground, hopefully in the next 2 or 3 years.
Power Court, I think. I might be wrong.
Court, yeah, that's right. I mean, the existing ground is dreadful. They've been trying to move it since 1955, would you believe? Now finally, it looks as though it's going ahead. They've got planning permission. I think it's just a finance issue, but hopefully you'll get a decent ground there now.
Yeah, Kenilworth Road is probably one of the last proper old football grounds that is still in existence. I know West Brom's ground has been there forever, but Kenilworth Road was a proper old football ground, close to the pitch, old seats, Oh yeah.
It's yeah, as you say, not apart from the rather odd decision about executive boxes on one side, which makes it a three-sided ground, of course. Executive boxes in non-league football is a bit of a an oddity, I think. But there we are. It would be very good for them. I'm pleased for them, really, because the supporters had to put up with a lot of pain, really, going in non-league football and all the financial trouble the club had and all the rest of it. It's very sad, but it's a well-supported club, and the supporters are very keen. It's a lot of decent, strong support for the club, and it's good to see them getting some success.
So Luton, of course, didn't spend too much money. I remember I was talking to you about the time I saw Plymouth at Luton. In the squad, Sonny Bradley was playing for them. Sonny Bradley was bought from Plymouth, so he was playing against his former side for less than 20k. Does that almost prove that money isn't necessarily important in football? Should our new owners come in and they don't spend a lot, would that really matter?
Well, it depends how you spend it, I think, isn't it? I mean, there's plenty of examples of clubs that have where money's been given to managers, a great deal has been spent, and it hasn't resulted in success on the field. And I think it's where you buy players who don't perform, you make poor choices. And I think even the most successful managers will look back and say certain players they bought were pretty hopeless or didn't perform. There's a certain amount of luck on it in it, as well as good judgment. Yes, I mean, Luton haven't had an enormous amount of money to spend, and they brought a number of players in from lower level clubs, from what I can see, who've then done extremely well. Obviously, money is important. If you don't have any money or very little money, then you're relying entirely on players you can pull in from the lower levels or your own youth scheme. If the youth scheme is doing extremely well, then that's fine. But otherwise, I think it's that judgment of being able to assess how good a player is and how they're going to fit into your team.
So again, this is an Ipswich show, not a Luton show, but Nathan Jones actually came in from Brighton. He was a Brighton youth coach, and Luton made the risk to bring him in as manager, and it paid off. Do you reckon we can make a similar risk with Nathan Dyer? Do you reckon Nathan Dyer could become a future Ipswich manager, maybe?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think he was a bit wild as a youth, wasn't he? I mean, I've got friends in Ipswich who are fairly critical. I think in his playing days, it's going around the nightclubs and all this sort of stuff. But then again, I think most people go through that phase in their life and then mature as they get older. So to be fair to Nathan Dyer, I'm sure he's matured. Well, who knows? I mean, you've got examples of managers who've come in relatively young, inexperienced. I mean, Alf Ramsey was in that position. He just finished playing. The first club he managed came to Ipswich and was a great success.
How about Bobby Robson? Sorry to interrupt. Was Bobby Robson experienced before he came in?
No, he was about 35. He recently finished playing. He was playing for Fulham, and they made him Fulham manager, but he had a desperate time. The players were roughly the same age as him, had no respect for him, and the club bombed. I mean, they actually sacked him fairly quickly, I think. Or I think they sacked him rather than he left. That was why he was in some ways a slightly strange appointment for Ipswich, because he had no pedigree. When he came to Ipswich, he had a similar problem, that the players most of them were a little bit older and they weren't far off his age. And he had a great deal of trouble winning respect. In fact, I think he had a couple of stand-up fights with players. At the end of the season, he said to Mick Mills and Chris Hammond and one or two others, look, stick with me, you're the players of the future. At the end of the season, I'm going to have a clear out. And the players who caused him problems were basically cleared out. And he brought new players in, and he went from strength to strength from there. But Robson had no pedigree, and he'd had a fairly torrid time at Fulham before he came to Ipswich. So they judged the character rather than his background and thought his character looks right. And that's often the case with the recruitment, isn't it? You judge a person's character, their personality, and how you feel they're going to do, rather than necessarily looking at immediately at the level of experience.
One final thing about Robson before we go on to recruitment briefly. What did Robson do right when he was at Ipswich? Because we won the UEFA Cup under him, we won the FA Cup under him. We had players such as Alan Hunter, Kevin Beattie, Alan Brazil, all of the legends. But what did he do right as an inexperienced manager?
Well, he realised that the future was with these younger players, and he realised that people like Mick Mills were obviously, as an England player, England captain, so on. These were high quality players. I think he was good with people. He was good people. You've got to be a good people manager to be a good football manager. He encouraged the younger players. He had a good youth setup working for him, and they were producing young players, pardon me, who were coming through, and he was able to coordinate them and support them. The older players he brought in the stopgap, he brought to shore the club up when they looked as though they're going down. He brought in Frank Clark at number 9, and our player's name escapes me, number 11 from Arsenal, former Spurs player. They were both very experienced players. They shored the team up until he could then get the younger through. And of course, he made some inspired moves in the transfer market. Paul Mariner. When I got the job I had for many years in Cornwall in 1982, and I put on my CV when I applied for the job that I was an Ipswich supporter. One of the people interviewing me was the vice principal of the college, and he said something to the effect of, "You bastards got Paul Mariner for nothing." He says, "How did you get away with that?" He says, "Yeah." This guy who interviewed me he says, "How can you tell me you're a Ipswich? It's absolute steal." And it was. I mean, money was different then, but even so, 100,000 was cheap for Paul Mariner. One of the few players he paid a great deal of money for was inspired by the 2 Dutch players, Tyson and Muren. Again,
Legends.
Brilliant buys. I can't think of a bad buy really that Robson made. And most of the players, I mean, BT, Brazil, Burley, Butcher, I mean, they all came through the Weimar Woods. They all came through the youth scheme. They paid decent money for Alan Hunter, I think. He came from Blackburn, I think. And he was already an international, wasn't he? A Northern Ireland international. But otherwise, they came through this highly successful youth development scheme.
So let's go on to recruitment, because you just said that that Ipswich didn't spend a lot of money, and the players they did bring in were highly successful. Do you reckon that is something which we failed upon in recent years? Because when you look at the players we've signed, especially this season, Stephen Ward, who's passed it, he hasn't been very successful. Do you reckon that is something that needs improving? Should the new owner come in? Should the recruitment be the first thing on this list to basically improve?
You may well be right. I think that Robson was I think recruitment's a talent, isn't it? Really, I think Robson just looked at the character of the players he had as well as their playing ability, and looked at how well they would fit in the team he had. And there is a gift in doing that. I think Clough had it. You look at the players Clough signed for Derby, and then later at Forest. Some of them were players from lower league clubs. Some of them were players you hadn't really heard of, but they were players he could mould into a team as he wanted. And it's that skill in, rather than just sort of spending a lot of money on someone who appears to be a great player. It's that sort of skill that's important. I mean, give you an example of a transfer recruitment that can go wrong. Many years ago, Manchester City signed Rodney Marsh. Now, Rodney Marsh was one of the most attractive, colourful players of his time. A brilliant player, very clever ball player. Manchester City were about 6 games or so off winning the First Division Championship. Marsh was brought along. Now, Marsh was a showman. He would play up front, and in many teams he was great. But Manchester City had a structure and a team plan that didn't really allow for that sort of player. And actually bringing Marsh in at vast expense was a disaster. The team never played so well with him, although I've got every respect for Marsh. He was a wonderful player, but he was the wrong player for that team at that time. And I think this is the problem, that you often find these star players are brought in, and they are great players. But if you don't have a team that builds around them and fits them, then you have problems. And this was Justin Fashanu at Norwich, for example, worked brilliantly at Norwich. It was a huge amount of money, 500,000 for him from Forest, hopeless at Forest. And there were a number of reasons for that, partly his private life affects him, but also the fact that the club played a different style. The team built around for Justin Fashanu at Norwich, whereas at Forest it was a much different way of playing, and he didn't get the support he had at Norwich, and he failed very badly. So I think it's that question, that chemistry of a team, isn't it? The signing players who will fit. I mean, even I used to run an amateur club, a Sunday league club, not even at the bottom of the pyramid, between. But we found there that we would bring in players who looked really good, and we get rid of them sometimes because they didn't fit in the team. They didn't mix with the other guys well. They were prima donnas, or they hogged them. All these sorts of things. Even though they were good players, they didn't fit in the ethos of the club. So we would sort of encourage them to go, type of thing.
So another example, and I apologise to those listening for talking about Norwich. Sorry, but Glenn Roeder, he recently passed away. Fantastic manager. He brought in Grant Holt for 500k, which was a snip. Grant Holt went on to become one of the best players to ever play for Norwich. Do you reckon that shrewd recruitment is something we're going to have to do under Paul Cook?
I think it's essential because you haven't got that much in the way. You haven't got that much money. You're going to have to use the resources you've got with great care. So, and after an era when there's been probably too many mistakes made in recruitment, either spending too much on players who haven't performed or bringing in players who simply aren't up to this level of football, you've really got to get it right. So it is that talent in being able to find players. I'm just briefly going back to Clough. Of course, he was very greatly helped by Peter Taylor, who was brilliant at spotting talent. And I think it was the combination of the two of them in finding talent and bringing them in. So if you've got another Peter Taylor, if the people who are getting in can do what Peter, I'm sure you're right that it is critical. Otherwise, you'll be wasting your money, and there's going to be increased frustration at watching an underperforming team.
So one last question before we wrap up.
Mm-hmm.
So in January, Paul Lambert brought in a whole load of young players into the club on loan, and I was criticised by calling them a whole load of panic signings. Do you reckon we should be playing our own youngsters, such as Corey and Darba, and Barry Cotter as well, instead of these youngsters who've literally come in on loan?
I will actually say I don't really know. I'm a little bit too out of touch with what's going on there to give a good answer to you, Ben. I suspect that the new manager, when he comes in, it's Paul Cook, presumably, or whoever, is going to spend a little bit of time looking at what he's got and come to some sensible conclusions. So look at the individual players, look at how they work together, give everyone a chance, really. I mean, I think when a new manager comes in, they often say to the players, I'm going to give you, everyone's here on an equal footing. Let's see what talent you've got, and start to see what skills they've got and how they perform, and then start to work out a settled team, and not to discriminate against whether it's a younger player or an older player or new signing or loan signing or whatever. Just see what you've got, build the best team you can out of that, then start looking to the end of the season to who you're going to offload, where you've got weaknesses that you need to bring in new players, that sort of thing. So I think it's a learning experience for whoever comes in to assess what he's got.
So finally, and thank you so much for appearing on the show. Tomorrow night, Ipswich travel all the way to Accrington with Matt Gill and, the goalkeeping coach, I've forgotten his name, that is embarrassing. But those two will be taking charge tomorrow at Accrington Stanley, with Accrington 7th and Ipswich Town 8th. Should we win, we could go into the playoffs. What do you reckon the score will be tomorrow? And do you reckon we'll walk away with a good result?
Whoa, that's a difficult. I think we're going to draw up there. I'll go 1-1. But that's not going to be so easy. And I think I wonder how teams react when this sort of thing happens. When you get upheaval in the boardroom and you get a manager leaving. I mean, sometimes when a manager leaves who's perhaps not been too popular, players suddenly improve, don't they? I mean, actually, to be fair, the last two games have played a bit better, but sometimes it seems to release some tension, and the players go out there and play. Also, if you've got, by that we don't know what's happening, but if Paul Cook is watching that game, and I suppose it's not impossible that he could make the trip up there, it will be in their interest to play as well as possible, to show off to the new manager, and indeed anyone else who's coming there to watch on his behalf. So you may well see a decent performance from Town up there for those reasons.
So about 12 players are out of contract. I know I said I was going to finish up a minute ago, but I've got one more question. 12 players are out of contract. Do you reckon they're now playing for a new contract should the new owner come in?
I would say so, yeah. I mean, if I was playing for the club and I saw a new manager come in, let's say I hadn't got on to the previous manager, or the previous manager didn't really rate me very highly, it's now my chance to establish a place, isn't it? And that often happens when managers go, because managers have their own favourites. They have styles of player that they like, other players whose style they don't like. You get very good players who leave a club because they haven't quite fitted in with what the manager wants. And it could be you've got a few players like that who now see this as an opportunity, and therefore they will try hard.
So once again, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Okay.
You're probably the only Ipswich fan that I know in Cornwall, so we have that special bond.
I think there are one. I bumped into one or two others, but yeah, there's relatively few. You're right.
Exactly. I mean, I think I've bumped into a few on the TWTD forum, but that's about it, really. But anyway, thank you very much for coming on the show. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Great.
So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben. Cheers.
Thank you.